Hey and welcome to the Clip Studio Paint Guide series of That Burn Guy. This episode is special and is a part of monthly Clip Studio Paint tips and was made for DrawingPlants category. And today I've prepared a detailed guide of how to draw a semi-realistic fantasy tree. The process might seem complicated, but all the steps are quite simple and easy to understand. And spoiler, here's a couple of my works made using this method. And we're going to learn it on an example of the right one. So let us begin. Stage 1. Prepare a shape of your tree. On this stage it is better if you have already decided what your tree will look like. It is not necessary to make the shape too detailed, though it would be useful so you won't have to make any additional corrections later. Usually I pick the dense watercolor brush for this purpose in some smooth and light shade like sky blue or light green. You are free to use any solid brush and color, but the non-stable density of watercolor is useful for making the primary shape more complex, so the strokes you make would create an effect of volume of the tree and its bark. The light and soft shades also won't distract you. Stage 2. Initial matte painting. Next, you should import an image of a real tree. It is better to use a high-resolution image so all the details, especially the tree's bark, are seen just right. Once you have imported the pic, activate the Clip to Layer Below option on this layer and place the tree in the way the bark's direction and size look natural regarding your drawn shape. The technique when you use some real photos or textures with drawn elements or other digital objects is called matte painting. However, we've just placed an initial texture that will guide us a bit in the following steps. We will get back to the actual and complex matte painting later. Stage 3. Texturing. Get back to your shapes layer and, using the auto select with refer to editing layer only preference, select the free space outside your tree and then invert the selected area. It is important not to select the shape itself, since due to non-stable density of watercolor and possible thin ending tips, the selection might not select some necessary areas or select some additional wrong areas. Even if you are using a solid brush, it is better to proceed the way I described to avoid selection errors. The next few steps include some optional actions, meaning they're necessary but you are free to change them in some ways. For example, now you should create a new layer with multiply preference and pick up a color for your first texture layer. I took a faded green shade since I am drawing a semi-realistic but still fantasy tree, and nature in fantasy is usually hyperbolic and romanticized. It is vast and lush. But you may take some brown sandy color or simply brown. It is up to you now. Despite what you choose, in the following steps you will only need to keep the gamut and the rest of actions will be pretty much the same. Use the soft airbrush for the described step. After that, create two new layers with darken and normal preferences. Using the soft airbrush, add another layer of color on the darkened layer. Then take the shadow airbrush with a darker shade of the color you've chosen and start adding the initial shadow that will guide you later. Don't forget about the branches and the roots. Create another layer for texturing with the screen preference. Using the soft airbrush, put the initial glare that will show the light source and the way it falls. On this stage, with initial lighting and shadowing, try imagining a more complex shape of your tree. Imagine how the barks go and how and where the first branches and roots divide. You should lay your shadow and the light depending on this now. As for the color of the light, you may use the same one used for the shadow since screen preference will make it bright enough. Now the fun starts. Art is scarce, so this step is even more free. You will need some special brushes from now on, and the full list of the ones I used for this tree will be available in the video description and in the end of this episode as well. Create another layer but with multiply, and using a darker shade of the same color, take this brush. It can be downloaded with the other brushes we will use in the Clip Studio assets. Download the pack under this name. Now just start adding the texture with the aforementioned brush. Once again there is enough of it, take the running color on fiber blending brush and smooth what you've got on the layer. Try not removing it too much. Then repeat the previous step on the new multiply layer, but this time try making the particles smaller and spread them more. Create a new layer with Add Preference. This time we are adding a more concentrated light effect using the same soft airbrush. Thanks to the Add Preference, the light will work with the other layers and won't overlap them. That will make it look more natural than the initial light we made before. On the new screen layer, we take another brush from the set I recommended. Make the particles much smaller and spread them across the tree as well. We've just started making our moss texture. After that, create a new multiply layer below the current one and add more of these particles. Use the same shade, they should be much darker this time. Then chaotically blur some particles on both layers with running color and fiber. Don't press too hard, leave enough of those particles visible and just barely blurred. Just a few words about the layer structure. You are free to use folders, color marking and names of layers at your discretion, but make sure the folders won't influence the result. Import another pic of a tree. Just make sure the selection we made in the beginning is still active. The pic can either be the same or a different one. I like the one I used in the beginning, so I decided to keep on with it. Just remember, the most important in a tree pic is its bark and resolution. Rasterize the pic to be able to edit it and erase everything that goes beyond the stem. The exact borders are up to you now. You may also leave some separate parts of the texture on other parts of the tree if you like the way they look. Stage 4. Main shadow and additional light. Make sure you return the selection and create a new multiply layer. Take some warm and not too bright shade like the one you can see in the video and give our tree body a toning with shadow airbrush. Just like the main light we've added before, this shadow is main for our tree and so it requires more detailed actions. So imagine the final shape and look of the tree once more. The textures we've already added should help you with this. Create an add layer and take similar warm but brighter shade. Take the soft airbrush and start adding another strong lighting on the opposite side. In this way we make our tree look more fantasy-like. So basically such a strong light is optional and can be either emphasized or even removed at all depending on your needs. Optional stage, editing. Now the need in this step depends on your actions in the very first stage. If the shape you prepared back then is detailed and represents the form of the tree you're trying to make, then you can skip this video and do the moment displayed on your screens. This is the step for those who decided to proceed with the basic shape. Now when we have prepared the basement of our tree, we are going to edit its form. There are a few ways to do this. They all are very simple but will take some time. Option 1. You can take the multiple layers eraser, select the needed layers and erase everything so it would become more tree-like. Option 2. Select the parts you'd like to erase with lasso, choose all the layers by holding Ctrl or using Shift, and press Delete. Option 3. Take a regular eraser and start erasing everything on the same places on each layer separately. It would take much more time, but you'll have more control on what you're doing. To be honest, there are plenty of those options. I guess most of you already have the preferable way of editing and erasing. Stage 5. Bark Texturing. Create a new multiply layer and pick some dark and dirty color you associate with the type of tree you draw. Don't forget about the color gamut. I'd recommend you to take the mechanical pencil for this step. It has a great balance of smoothness and sharpness. I've sent that artist cast a couple of times now, and here we are again. We are drawing, or rather emphasizing, the texture of the bark. So what you need to do here is to draw several separate curved lines across the whole tree. Draw it under a branch growing from the stem, draw it on the tree texture we added from the peak, draw it along the roots. The easiest way to do this is to draw two small lines and blur their inner or outer sides. Not the whole lines, this is important. But remember, you should follow the way your tree and its separate parts go, so it would look natural. You can also use those lines to, for example, sharpen a border between different objects. Now take a running color on fiber blurring brush and blur the lines in the way I described just a minute ago. Why is it important not to blur the whole lines but only their sides? Well, in this way we create a special volume effect, making the whole tree look much more complex. Now you may also blur the whole layer with Gaussian blur if the lines seem too sharp for the overall art. Simply press the filter bar at the very top of Clip Studio, then Blur and Gaussian Blur. I will do this a bit later in the video, but I mentioned it now not to break the current step. Stage 6. The Magic of Light. Create a color dodge layer and pick some nice and sunny color, of some slightly faded yellow, orange or even red shades. Since we are still drawing a fantasy tree, a strong and blurry lighting effect will make it look mystically and majestically. Using a big soft airbrush, lay the light along the current main light on the color dodge layer we've created. We don't need the selection in this step, the tree should nearly glow with this effect. Now create two more layers below the color dodge one. They should be with multiply, the lower one, and add, the higher one, preferences. Take this brush once more and repeat the same texturing process we did on the 6th minute. We do this to cover the second peak of the tree with the same texture a bit to make it look more artistic. Stage 7. More of matte painting. Find a picture of a forest or bushes or just multiple trees. The main thing, there should be a lot of leaves and grass if possible. Find the one with the best resolution you can and open it in Clip Studio. Then press the select bar and press the select color gamut option. This will let you to select pixels on the same shade only. And the higher the number you set in the opened window, the closer to the chosen one shades will be selected. So if you set it to 5, for example, and then press on any pixel, the program will only select every pixel with the same shade and every pixel with 5 shades nearest to the one you've pointed on. I usually set it to 10. I hope my explanations make sense. Copy and paste the selected elements to your project. Erase the areas you deem to be unnecessary and put it on your tree. You may combine several pics with different elements. Make the layer you received with color dodge preference and with light touches using the soft eraser, add some transparency to the areas in the shadow. Once you're done, create a normal layer, pick a below brush, and with the color close to the one the tree already has, make a line along the stem's borders so it won't look so sharp. You can also simply blur the borders on several of the first layers we made, or proceed with a different way. You don't have to follow this stage step by step. I found another pic with lots of leaves and grass since I didn't like the detail of the previous one. I did not delete it, I just added another one. As you can see, this one gave me some grass and the roots and added the overall complexity. Transfer it under some of the previous effects so they would take effect on it. Then proceed with some corrections if needed, like adding transparency at the places at shadow. After that, whether you added more of this green or not, press the edit bar, then smart smoothen and apply the weak smoothen. Now these elements are like they all were drawn with some oil brush, and not like they were taken from a pic. Stage 8. Small details. Create a new layer and take running color spray. Make it really big, so this time would be about the brush's radius. And place some particles here. I prefer adding the yellow ones, they are warm and look nice. These particles might be some seeds spread by air, or fireflies, or just some mystic magical yellow particles like in my case. Also add some of those in more concentrated groups within the tree's borders. Those are moss outgrowth. You may also take a different spray or just make the current one smaller if your tree is old and overgrown. Once you are satisfied with how they are located, blur some of them. In a chaotic way, of course. Now we will add some grass so our tree won't just fly into space. The names of the brushes are on your screen. First, add some dark ones for the background, and then several layers of more light ones. Everything simple. Just spread them naturally and keep an eye on other objects. The grass might grow on roots, but the most of it should surround them, so you should also watch the roots to cover it where necessary. Create a multiply layer, pick the shadow airbrush with some nearly black shade and draw the shadow from the tree. Nothing special and really nothing more to explain. Get back to the color dodge layer, the one with the glowing light, and repeat the same process but with the roots. Remember to take the proper colors that match with the ones that are currently on the area where you're going to draw. You may also make some corrections if needed, make the light weaker or remove it from some areas, for example. Create a new layer and put it in a folder. Then move the folder below all the existing layers. The creation of a folder is necessary since it won't let other effects influence the layer in it. Now pick your favorite foliage brush and draw a solid layer of dark leaves. This will make a background for the tree crown. At these steps, our guide becomes chaotic to the state where everyone should decide how they should draw the foliage, since this part of tree can be as varied as possible. You may follow my way and make it so lush that the branches would be hardly visible. I guess it can be called a typical anime style foliage. Or you can take a brush that draws with separate leaves and fulfill every single branch yourself. The precious of my method of drawing a tree is that the stem you made can go with many different foliage styles and they will all look great. From now on, it depends on your skills and preferences only. But there are still a few tips I can't skip, and you should follow them if you'd like to make your tree look great. Number 1. Despite how lush or detailed your foliage is, you should follow the way you lead the branches. Spread the leaves according to their location and direction. Number 2. Don't forget about the light source. You've added it to the stem, so don't leave the leaves behind. Let some rays make their way through the crown. I use this brush for this. And add the main light and shadow zones. And several small ones between the leaves' congestions. Number 3. Add some simple but important small elements that will make your work more detailed and complicated. It can be a shadow from the leaves on the stem, animals, effects, etc. Number 4. Remember, you can always return and correct your mistakes. Use the edit bar for this. For example, use the tonal correction section if you'd like to change the colors completely or just to improve the contrast of the foliage if it seems too saturated. Or use the filter bar for the overall corrections. It is also okay if you'd like to return to some parts of the tree and change them entirely. Number 5. Think of the environment. Where is your tree located? Is it a mystic forest? Then add some mist. Or maybe it is a lonely tree in some mountainous region? Then surround it with rocks. A successful composition can improve your art greatly. So, these were the foliage tips and some post tips I'd really recommend to remember. They are simple and, yes, maybe can even be called basic, but they are equally important. I'd like to thank everyone who watched this guide, and I'm really happy if it actually helped you to improve your skills. I'd be happy to reply on any questions of yours in the comment section or on one of those social medias. And I'm thankful to the Clip Studio team who brought us such an amazing, nearly ultimate program. This is my first time participating in Clip Studio tips, but I'm sure I'll take a part in the future as well. See you next time!